Hey guys, so what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, I thought we'd continue discussions on, previous topics. Last week we talked about battling FOMO and, fear of missing out, and maybe choosing an army or a collection of an army or a painting of an army in a way that's going to allow you to complete it in a more focused way. So that was doing one by one, and my crazy method of doing that with a Blight King's army. But now there's another, the value for this week. We want to look at the value of a gaming standard, or a more efficient or faster process way of finishing an army, so that you have a completed army that you can play with while you're doing these other projects. I think the value of that is really, really beneficial to almost everyone's hobby, no matter how much you really game or not game. Completing a project and having at least one under your belt that you can pull out at any time and play a game, whether it be at a club, a hobby store, a tournament, or with your mates, is always great. You don't have to have painted models, obviously, but it is a really enjoyable way to experience the hobby, even if you're just a painter. The gaming side helps influence a lot of your inspiration and motivation to paint. It's like a cycle, you do some painting, you do some gaming, it then inspires you to paint more, and then you paint more, and then you game more, and so on and so on. So it's a whole process. And having one of these armies that you focus on as more of a gaming army, which means that you don't obsess over making sure that every single aspect of it is perfectly painted, or at least use processes which are a little bit quicker in certain instances, and more like choosing more focused areas where you are going to put your work in and where you're not. And so that's what I mean by, a gaming standard or a battle ready standard, not necessarily just a speed painted army, but something that might have some efficient processes in it. So because what I find is, so if we just talk about that for a minute, things like speed painting armies, or 24-hour challenges, that sort of thing, they're great, and you should definitely, if you have the money and the time to invest in something like that, if you want to do that with a mate, or whatever you're doing, they are really fun. I've done many of them in my life, and they're a lot of fun to do. But what I've found is that often, one, it's very hard to complete them. That's for a start. But two, unless you're doing very specific armies for it. But two, you generally don't particularly love the finished result that you've done. And you often don't really play, game, or otherwise do anything with those models afterwards. They tend to be less than what your standard is. And so I've just found that I often don't really use them much or do anything with them. And so it's kind of like a wasted thing. It's cool, it's fun, but for most armies, unless you're doing like just all metallics, like a Necron army or something like that, you're not going to notice it as much. But anything that has a lot of details on it, often it doesn't finish quite up to the standard that you want. So what I sort of gun for is picking an army. There's a few things you need to consider, but basically the idea is more of a focused approach, where some elements will be like done fast in a speed painting, method, and then others, certain elements on the figure, like for instance the faces, flesh tones, things like that, you'll slow down and make sure they're up to the standard that you'd normally paint to. And so you have some speedy methods and some slower methods, but overall it's a more efficient paint scheme and so on, and that should get you a faster result. So there's a few things that I want to go through with this before you consider attacking an army in this way. It's not just about the painting of it, is what I'm getting at. So let's go through that and think about, okay, what's the value of this? Do we really want to do it? And I think you'll find that choosing an army this way has its merits. Whether you have the money and time, and obviously to do this, is another matter, but it definitely has its merits. So let's go through it. I think the first thing to consider, apart from obviously the one that inspires you or that you love the look of, or all that kind of stuff, which is obviously extremely important, but one element to consider is how supported is this army by the company that makes it. In this case, Games Workshop Warhammer. That is a factor that you should consider for your gaming army, for the army that you're going to play. You want to get done fast, you want to have it completed, painted, and you're going to be using it regularly. So for this type of question is important, because if you choose one of the armies that maybe gets a bit of under support or isn't quite as popular, I would do that army. If you really love that army, I would do that for your painting army. You're the one that you're going to spend way more time on, your painting project, your conversion project. That's the one that you're really going to put the love and passion and attention into, right? That's the army for you. So I'm a big exponent of having multiple armies that you're attacking in a different way. So ones that are for high painting standard or display or conversion or whatever. Ones that are a gaming standard like this that we see in front of you here. Ones that are a certain type of challenge that are to do with, like for instance, the Blight Kings, which are a willpower challenge to sort of complete something, and make sure I'm not buying more than what I'm actually painting, that sort of thing, or other challenges. It might be a conversion challenge. So the army has a focus and a specific thing that you're trying to achieve with it, and try to go for that goal, because that also keeps you focused on getting it done. Lore and background isn't always enough to keep your eye on the prize. And so for a gaming army specifically, if you want something that you can pull out and game with regularly and have a bit of fun with while you're doing those other projects, you need an army that's going to be supported. It can't really be one of the ones that doesn't get much love. Okay, so in the case of 40k, that probably means this army that's in front of you right here. Specifically, Primaris Space Marines is the one that you'd want to pick. Outside of Primaris Space Marines, I would suggest what are the other big ones that are going to get some love? I mean, Chaos Space Marines will always get love as well. You could definitely choose those, but their rules generally, they fluctuate through the editions. Some editions are more powerful than others, so there is that. Obviously, you want to do what you love, right? So there are other choices, but the big ones would be like Eldar, Chaos, Space Marines. They're probably the big three, I would say, that would get a bit of love here and there. I mean, whatever you want to say about the Chaos Codex, I mean, they still have the Death Guard book, which is obviously very competitive. So there are those sub-factions that get their books that are much more powerful. But I really feel like Space Marine Chapter is the one to choose for this. But, each one that you choose outside of that is going to have a little bit less play on the field. And what you really want is something that's I guess speaks to your tactical sense. For me, I want to balance. I want to have options of troops. I want to have as many options as possible. I don't want to have restrictions. So more glass cannon armies or more specific armies aren't going to be for me, because I want to have those choices. And Space Marines are always going to get the most models, the most attention. And you might say that's sad or whatever else. And it is a shame in some sense of the word, but it's going to give you the best gaming experience, 100%. There's so many codexes for it. There's so many choices. It's the one to choose, and they're great to paint and do these kind of speed techniques on. And I would highly recommend a metallic scheme for them specifically, because that's going to give you one of the best results really fast, as we're going to see in a minute. I'll show you some close-ups of these and you can see what I mean. It's just metallic color schemes are a really good choice. There's a reason why in AOS the Stormcast Eternals are done with a gold color scheme, and the metallics are a big part of that, because they're easy to get down. They don't mess up as fast. They're very forgiving. You can do a lot of different methods on them. I would highly recommend a metallic color scheme. Even if you're going to choose Eldar, Dark Eldar, whatever you're going to choose, if you're not going to pick the most supported one, and you're going to say, no, screw you, Ado, I don't like what you're saying, I'm going to pick these. That's fine. I would choose a color scheme which is going to be suited to a faster technique. That's the next step of this conversation. So once you've figured out which one is going to be the most supported, and I would say Space Marines is the best one to choose, then we're looking at the color scheme. So as you've already probably been aware, I would recommend a metallic scheme, and specifically something you can either go through an airbrush or a spray can. I choose spray can because it's less fuss to set up, do, and so on. You know, even if you've got a setup like I do, or most people do, a little booth or something like that, it still requires a lot of pack up, a setup and then pack up and so on. And I would rather just get these guys onto, something, take them outside, give them a spray, and you're done and you're ready to go. And I think that's the best way. And so that you can get this army together very fast. I would also recommend no sub-assembly. We're looking at getting these together. I would also recommend any basing is already on the model before you go for your black undercoat, or whichever undercoat, zenith, or whatever you're going to do. Make sure it's all together, and then you're going to get that down, and then you go in with your metallic spray and spray them all up, and then they're almost half your job is almost done, right? You're already halfway there, and then you can look at your washes and your various ways that you're going to approach this to get this army finished, and then the focus will be on those details we'll talk about in a second. But this type of thing is going to really set you up well. Now you could obviously do a color, but I would just for a gaming army that you're going to get on the table and start going, I would highly recommend a metallic scheme. So another really good one would be Necrons. Necrons, generally are relatively decent that's arguable as well, I guess, but they do have a very, very well supported range at the moment. So I would say that a Necron army would be great. You got to look at what's in the box, what's in the base box sets and that sort of thing, and what they're promoting, you know what I mean? And Indominus boxes full of Necrons, full of Space Marines, it's the way to go at the moment. And if you are in this edition, then either one of those two are probably going to be a good choice. But again, as I said, Death Guard were from the previous edition and they were well supported. They continue to be a strong choice, and they're also a very forgiving choice for new painters and that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean that they're always going to get the love and support that they need. They haven't for a long time. It's only new that they've got that kind of support. So Death Guard is a good choice, but one to be aware of, that maybe in future editions down the line that may not be the most loved or supported choice, right? So that is something to consider. Not a huge consideration, but something to bear in mind. So going past all that, we've chosen our thing, we've got our color scheme. Now we're looking at which parts of this are we going to paint well and which ones aren't we going to paint well, because that's the next consideration before you begin. So we're not looking for a 24-hour challenge speed painting here. We're still spending a couple of hours at least on each model. And on your character models here, these ones are all character models. I've obviously spent a lot more time on them, but they still use the same basic processes from a basic troop. So we'll get a comparison in a sec. I'll bring one out so you can see the difference. But that's where we want to be. And so you've got your base color down, you've got your washes that you're going to do, and with metallics you can then, if you're really good, you can now look at things like dry brushing for highlights, because dry brushing works really well on metallics and you're not going to get a bad finish. All of these have had dry brushed highlights. On these character models, they'll then get an extra line edge highlight, but on a lot of the base ones, it's almost no line edge highlighting at all. It's mostly just dry brushing, but very focused dry brushing. So you pick your techniques that are going to get you the best result. A nice clean finish that's going to look better than what it really is, or a better finish than what you would expect. And then we get onto the fine details. And those areas are things like, whatever motifs are on the model. So in this case, the Aquila, the helmets, the faces, the focal point of the model. That's where you want to spend your time. Your secondary color. So one of the powerful things about metallics is what they're contrasted against. So in this case, you definitely want to have a matte or satin finish material on some parts of the model. So the most obvious ones are knee pads, shoulder pads, and helmets. But sometimes you might do like the chest plate or something like that, or whatever. Obviously the Aquilas and all that, they could also be done in a matte color like I've done here, but you might do them in gold or another metallic as well. But if you're doing a metallic, sometimes just getting that out of metallic and doing that something else is a nice variance, because you want a mix of textures. Whenever you do metallic color schemes, if they're all the one color, they tend to become a bit bland, and that's the danger with Necrons. You find that you really need a matte color or something else. That's why a lot of people will do all those glow effects and so on, because you need something to compete with that metallic. Otherwise it dominates and it tends to become a bit bland. And so that's where things like this come in. So you want those areas where you're going to put some focus, but still want it to be relatively fast. And then finally, just for faces and things like that, that's where you spend the most time, and so that you'll end up with something that's really cool and relatively quick to paint. The metallic stages and your basing, those simple first few steps, you could knock out the metallic, the dry brushing and the washing and all that sort of stuff, and do the base before you've even finished all the details, and you've now got a painted thing that you can start playing with. If you go back and look at my videos where I've talked about doing oily metallics and some of those early videos, you'll see that approach. Some of my early hobby vlogs are showing how I got these guys to where they are. But it's all painted. Every single thing has at least the metallics done and the base done, so that I can start playing with something that's painted. And that's kind of the goal for this gaming army. It's about looking at it broadly and trying to then slowly hone down on details rather than getting caught up on every one. And then that process of doing batch and single figure, I would highly recommend. So you're going through maybe 10 models, then come to one of your individual ones and just focus on that. Then go back to your 10 or whatever, and then come back to one of these. And so that your characters or your sergeants and your leader models shouldn't be done in the batch. They should be done individually, or at least in twos or something like that. Don't put them in the batch, because they're just going to end up of a lower quality, and in the end you're not going to like it as much. So keep them as little treats, special treats to just focus on, and then just do your batch for your main guys, and then come to these. And I promise you that will give you a much better result, and you're gonna overall, the broad look of the army is going to be much higher. Now obviously everyone's battle standard is different. My experience versus yours is going to be different. Yours might be higher, yours might be lower. It doesn't really matter. Those kinds of things don't really matter. It's all particular just to you. You're looking at a style that's going to pretty much meet your basic level that you like, that you can be happy with, and that's what you're trying to look at for this army, not something below that. You don't want to just rush it and just smash it out, because you're not going to like them. You're just going to end up doing another army because you're not going to play with them. So let's take a closer look at these now that I've ranted on enough about that, and see what kind of difference we get. So here's one of my basic troops. So you can see here he's just using basic methods. Okay, there's nothing too crazy or fancy going on, but it gets the job done. Okay, they were dry brushed highlights. Okay, if I can stop shaking, with a little bit of line edge highlight just on the tops, not all the way around, not everywhere, just on the main areas where you're going to see it. Okay, grey highlights for the gun. Okay, and then we've got like the grey highlights for the helmet and the shoulder pads and the knee pad, but then I've gone with the contrast to tint it to a blue and give you that lacquered surface. As of this week, I think yesterday, as of this video, there should be one that shows how to do tinting blacks on Space Marine armor, these particularly with contrast. So you can see how I've done it if you want to have a look at that, and that will show you this what I've specifically done here if you like it. But that's your base standard, right? And then if we take a look at your leader here, okay, your chaplain, now we've gone a little bit slower. There's a few more highlights here and there, and I've paid extra careful attention to the face, so that's the most prominent thing. And overall, when you look at them together, it feels like a higher standard than maybe what it actually is individually if you have a really close look at it. And so together, the basic troops don't sit out of place with those leaders. And we even pay a bit more attention to the sergeants, so they get done on a smaller scale, not in the massive bulk. At least not they can be in the bulk for the base stage of your metallics, but once you get down to details, section them away to a smaller group so that you're not doing them all together. So that all of these then look nice and fit well together, and you're going to be really happy with them. And so that's really what this is about, is getting the most enjoyment out of it. So choosing your color scheme wisely, looking at what kind of spray paints you can get out of them that are going to achieve that, what kind of washes or contrast paints or whatever you're going to use to get your shading in quickly. Can you use dry brushing to highlight it? Is that going to be effective? Metallics, definitely yes. Other colors, you're going to have to be more careful, but you can do it. You just got to be more focused and more particular about your dry brushing, but you can get it done and have it look really cool. And then you can get these things out there and have that gaming army that you know is going to be supported by the company, and that it's always going to be there, and you can have a good experience with it while you're then going back and doing your crazy, you know, as we've been doing on this Blight King here, you know, your focused paint jobs. I can get that in focus, and you know, doing like wet blending and highlights and all this kind of stuff on something like that, which is really cool. But obviously you're not going to be your army's going to take a lot longer to get done, right? This is about getting a group of models together done in a much faster time frame, and you know, that's going to build up your satisfaction as well. So if we move back now to that theory part of this, where we're looking at, you know, what's actually going to be beneficial to you, this will also help with that FOMO problem and with that buying problem, because now you've got this finished bunch of models which you're happy with, that you can go game with a friend, you know, and experience that other side of the hobby, which so many of us don't get much of a chance to do, especially, you know, in this time period with what's going on in the world. It's not always possible, but having that option there, having those few moments where you can spend with someone, is really, really beneficial. Even if you're just a painter, I highly recommend you go out and do that when you can, when it's safe, obviously, for you in the area that you're in. You know, that it just lifts the whole experience of this hobby to something else, which I think is where the real value of this thing is. There's the personal thing of you sitting at the table and enjoying that creative time, you know, that nice meditative moment, but then there's also the experience of sharing with someone else. And I think that's a real important part of this. And so you're going to get the best of both worlds. You've got this one army that you use like this to go out and have a good time with, and then you've got your other armies that you focus more attention on and go slower with, and you know, and take your time. And that should dwindle, you know, the grey boxes that you have sitting away in the corner. You should start to move through them a little bit faster if you start attacking these projects with a little bit more specificity, if I can say that correctly. Specificity, yeah, that's it. I think you'll be starting to attach goals to this that are more reasonable and less anxiety driven, and you know, that you can achieve. You know, it's very much the same, like, as I've talked about before, analogy of you know, losing weight in the gym. You know, you build up this sort of gradual momentum, and you get better and better and better, and your body gets better and better and better, and more efficient at it. And before you know it, you've lost all this weight and you've gained all this you know, strength and muscle and so on, and you feel better. And it just comes over this gradual thing, and you just look in the mirror one day and you're like, oh wow, I just lost all that weight, you know, and you don't even really realize it when it's happening. And that's the same for this. It's going to give you the same kind of strength of mind, of willpower to attack this hobby with, you know, a gusto that you didn't think you had, you know, and you'll have a healthier hobby for it. You won't be so bloated with all of these models. You'll be a lean, mean fighting machine, and you'll have that painting power, you know, and you'll see your painting improve as well, because you'll be doing more. You'll be doing more active hobby, which is going to help you overall. You know, even if it's a little tiny bit a day or a little bit here and there, that's going to improve so much about your hobby experience. So yeah, that's where I think I'll leave it. I hope this has been beneficial or in some way inspiring to get you thinking about your hobby in maybe a different way, or just looking at the armies you've got and seeing how you can reinvigorate your choice. Now, as I said, you don't have to do Space Marines. That's just the one I think is the most viable for this type of gaming army, but there are plenty you could choose. They are trying to support the others. I'm not saying Games Workshop doesn't. Obviously, do the army that's best for you, that you love, but find a color scheme at least that's going to get that done relatively fast, so you can have that one that you just game with. Now, you might say, oh, I don't have the money for this, whatever. I think you'll find you do. If you're in this hobby, then you'll find the way to get this done. It just might take a bit longer, you know. It might take you 2 years or whatever to achieve the goal, but it's more about the goal setting and less about the fit. Like, yeah, don't worry too much about the amount of models you need or whatever you do. You know, you can ration that out and do it. If you're in this hobby at all, it means you have some level of expendable income that you're spending on this, which means you can budget this out and get it done. And in the end, that's going to be better for you anyway, because then you're not overspending, right? You'll be able to get each section done in a more efficient way. So yeah, just whichever one you choose, make your game plan, and then work on trying to complete that, and make sure you have your other more long-term projects that you can dabble in. You know, I don't just work on this. I'll do this for a few months, put that aside for a minute, get it to a good point, come back, do another project for a month, then come back to this. And that's how I like to do it. But you'll have your own methods, and that's the point. You know, being more conscious about how you're actually sitting at that table and what you're doing. It improves everything about it. This is something that comes from art. So I'm a sculptor, so this kind of stuff is all just normal for artists. We delve into these practices. Our artistic practice is something that everyone focuses on when they're an artist. They always are looking at their workflow, how they're creating. We're always self-analyzing, always questioning ourselves about this. And if you don't consider yourself an artist, I hate to tell you, you are. If you're in this hobby and you're doing these creative things, even if you don't think you are, you actually are a creative, you know, an artistic person, because you're generating beautiful art. You know, even if you don't think so, it certainly is. And you're in that process, so you may as well just accept it and start, you know, doing this kind of self-analysis and focused work, because it's going to help improve everything that you do, and you'll come out the other side a much happier person for it, outside of the hobby as well. So that's all my 2 cents on this. I hope it's helped. Please hit that subscribe button if you've liked it and all that kind of stuff, and notify button. And otherwise, I guess I'll catch you on the next one.